On January 17, 2026, a biting winter wind swept across the steps of Minneapolis City Hall, where a crowd began to gather, bracing against the cold and the weight of their concerns. Political tensions, already simmering for months, finally reached a boiling point as citizens from across Minnesota converged in the heart of the city. The March Against Minnesota Fraud, organized and led by conservative influencer Jake Lang, was more than just a protest. It was a rallying cry to expose what many saw as a shocking betrayal of public trust. Lang and his supporters sought to shine a spotlight on recent massive fraud allegations involving billions in Minnesota public funds, demanding that the public no longer turn a blind eye. With a megaphone in hand, Lang accused state officials of failing to protect taxpayer money, rallying his supporters to demand accountability and transparency from those in power. He called for a full investigation and for those responsible to be held to the highest standard. The protest zeroed in on high-profile scandals, including the alleged theft from Medicaid waiver programs and the Feeding Our Future case, both of which had dominated headlines and shaken public confidence in state oversight. Lang's message was clear and urgent. Minnesota's finances are in crisis, and ordinary citizens must step up to demand change before more damage is done. The choice of City Hall as the protest site was no accident. By gathering at the seat of local government, demonstrators issued a direct challenge to both city and state leaders, demanding that they answer for the alleged failures. The protest erupted just days after explosive new Medicaid fraud revelations, with organizers hoping to channel the fresh wave of public outrage into meaningful action and policy reform. For many in attendance, the alleged fraud symbolized a broken system, one where the powerful and well-connected benefit at the expense of the vulnerable, and where oversight had failed those most in need. Protesters demanded not just answers, but sweeping reforms and real justice for the billions of taxpayer dollars lost. They called for new safeguards, stricter oversight, and a commitment to restoring public trust. The demonstration became a powerful public declaration. Minnesotans would no longer tolerate a culture of corruption, and they were ready to hold their leaders accountable. As chants echoed off the stone walls of City Hall, the message was unmistakable. The people of Minnesota wanted their voices heard, and they would not rest until real change was achieved at the very heart of the state's power. Jake Lang, the protest's organizer, is a polarizing conservative activist and social media influencer. He's become a recognizable figure in the world of right-wing activism, often making headlines for his outspoken views and controversial actions. Lang's rise to prominence has been fueled by his ability to tap into the frustrations of a growing segment of Americans who feel left behind by the political establishment. Known for his involvement in the January 6 Capitol riot, an event that led to his arrest and later pardon, Lang is celebrated by some, condemned by others. His participation in that day's events cemented his status as both a hero to his supporters and a villain to his critics, making him a lightning rod for debate about protest, free speech, and the limits of political dissent in America. With nearly 74,000 Facebook followers, he uses his platform to criticize government corruption and mobilize supporters. Lang's social media presence is carefully curated, mixing personal stories, political commentary, and calls to action. He frequently posts videos and live streams, engaging directly with his audience and encouraging them to get involved in causes he champions. Lang's messaging resonates with those who feel disenfranchised and distrustful of institutions. He speaks to people who believe their voices are ignored by mainstream politicians and media, offering them a sense of community and purpose. His rhetoric often focuses on themes of injustice, government overreach, and the need for ordinary citizens to take a stand. For the Minneapolis protest, he leveraged his online reach to draw national attention to Minnesota's scandals. By amplifying local grievances on a national stage, Lang was able to rally people from across the country, turning what might have been a small protest into a significant event with far-reaching implications. He framed the fraud as a clear case of politicians ignoring massive theft, positioning himself as a watchdog for taxpayers. Lang's narrative painted a picture of widespread corruption and a government unwilling to protect its citizens, further fueling the anger and determination of his followers. Lang's call to action was urgent, a moral imperative to demand justice and accountability. He urged his supporters to see themselves as part of a larger movement, fighting not just for one issue, but for the very soul of the nation. By organizing the march, he reinforced his brand as a fearless activist confronting powerful interests. His willingness to stand at the front lines, even in the face of opposition, has become a defining feature of his public persona. His presence turned a local issue into a national flashpoint for anger and frustration, sparking conversations about activism, accountability, and the power of grassroots movements to challenge those in authority. The protest was ignited by explosive claims of widespread fraud within Minnesota's public assistance programs, sending shockwaves through the community. As news of the allegations spread, people from all walks of life gathered in Minneapolis, demanding answers and accountability from their leaders. At the center of the controversy was former First Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson. He alleged that as much as half of the $9 billion in Medicaid waiver funds distributed since 2018 could have been siphoned off through fraudulent means. Thompson's statements, delivered at a tense press conference, stunned both officials and the public, raising urgent questions about oversight and transparency. Medicaid waivers are designed to support Minnesota's most vulnerable residents, elderly individuals, people with disabilities, and those in need of long-term care. The idea that funds meant for these groups could be stolen or misused made the allegations even more disturbing, striking at the heart of the state's social safety net. The sheer scale of the alleged fraud, potentially billions of dollars, sparked outrage and a deep sense of betrayal. Citizens questioned how such a massive breach could go undetected for years, and many began to lose faith in the institutions meant to protect them. These revelations came on the heels of the Feeding Our Future scandal, a case that had already shaken public trust. In that scheme, a nonprofit organization stole $250 million intended to feed children during the pandemic, exploiting emergency relief programs at a time of crisis. The leaders of the Feeding Our Future scheme set up shell companies, submitted fake invoices, and laundered the stolen money through lavish purchases, luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and high-end real estate. The details of their operation revealed just how easily public funds could be diverted for personal gain. The fallout was swift and severe. The Feeding Our Future case led to dozens of criminal charges and high-profile convictions, but it also left Minnesotans wondering how many other programs might be vulnerable to similar abuse. So when new allegations of Medicaid fraud surfaced, it felt to many like history was repeating itself. The sense of déjà vu was palpable, and the public's frustration only grew as more details emerged. For countless Minnesotans, these back-to-back scandals confirmed their worst fears, that the system was broken, plagued by a lack of oversight and accountability. Many began to question whether meaningful reform was even possible. Against this backdrop of anger and disillusionment, protest leaders rallied the community. The combination of these crises set the stage for Lange's protest, as citizens demanded not just answers, but real change. The Medicaid waiver fraud allegations are staggering. Up to $4.5 billion may have been stolen since 2018. These programs are vital for people with disabilities and the elderly, making the betrayal even more severe. Fraud schemes included billing for services never provided and inflating hours of care. Conservative influencers amplified the scandal, with viral videos showing empty, publicly funded daycare centers. The public saw these as proof of sham operations, siphoning taxpayer money. The scandal has triggered calls for a complete overhaul of state oversight and a thorough investigation. Minnesotans want those responsible held accountable and stolen funds recovered. Before the Medicaid scandal, Minnesota was rocked by the Feeding Our Future case, one of the nation's largest pandemic frauds. The nonprofit was supposed to feed children during COVID-19, but instead stole $250 million through fake sites and invoices. Leaders used the money for luxury homes, cars, and watches, betraying public trust. The contrast between the program's mission and the fraud's extravagance outraged Minnesotans. Over 70 people were charged, making it a symbol of government failure and lack of oversight. The scandal primed the public to expect the worst from state programs. When Medicaid fraud allegations emerged, outrage intensified. These back-to-back scandals fueled demands for radical change. Despite national attention, the March Against Minnesota Fraud drew a modest crowd to City Hall. Jake Lange and his supporters were met by vocal counter-protesters, leading to a tense standoff. Police kept the groups apart, but the situation quickly escalated. Lange was sprayed with silly string and water, sparking physical altercations and chaos. Social media captured the turmoil, including footage of Lange injured on the ground. Counter-protesters opposed Lange's presence, viewing him as an outsider stirring division. For them, the protest was a political stunt, not a genuine call for reform. The clash became less about fraud and more about deep political and cultural divides. The day's defining images were of shouting, scuffling, and a fractured society. The protest's original message was overshadowed by raw animosity. Minneapolis police anticipated conflict and maintained a strong presence at the protest. Officers kept protesters and counter-protesters separated, intervening when scuffles broke out. Governor Tim Walz mobilized the National Guard as a precaution, though they remained on standby. The response reflected lessons from past unrest: containment, not escalation. Authorities aimed to protect free speech while preventing violence. The Guard's readiness signaled the seriousness of the situation and a commitment to public order. Law enforcement made clear protest was allowed, but lawlessness would not be tolerated. Lange's protest unfolded in a city already on edge from recent unrest. Minneapolis had seen ongoing protests after 2 ICE-related shootings, fueling anger and distrust of law enforcement. The fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer sparked sustained outrage and calls for justice. These events mobilized activists and heightened tensions around any public demonstration. Meanwhile, a federal investigation into Governor Walz and Mayor Frey for allegedly impeding ICE added political drama. The city became a flashpoint for overlapping grievances: immigration, police accountability, and now financial fraud. Another major protest, a day of action against ICE, was already planned for later in January. Lange's march landed in the middle of this volatile mix, ensuring it would be seen through a lens of existing conflict. Minneapolis was a city defined by protest and deep social divisions. The march against Minnesota fraud was small in turnout, but big in significance. It reflected deep anger and distrust toward government after massive fraud scandals. National figures like Donald Trump and Representative Tom Emmer amplified the issue, turning it into a national debate. Jake Lange's involvement brought further attention and controversy. The protest highlighted intense polarization, more about tribal animosity than policy solutions. Even on stopping fraud, common ground was elusive. For Minnesota, the event exposed a crisis of trust and a damaged reputation for good governance. Leaders now face the challenge of fixing broken systems and restoring public faith. The protest was messy and divisive, but it made clear the urgent need for accountability. Its echoes will shape Minnesota's political landscape for years to come.